Who will pay? It's always the welders, single mothers, seniors who will have to deal with the increased cost of groceries and the doubling in the cost of housing. The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Mr. Speaker, what Canadians heard is a leader who doesn't have a vision, no ambition, and no plan. On this side of the House, we understand that Canadians understand that a country with ambition is a country that invests. It's a country that invests in more jobs, that invests in building more housing, that has more growth, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we will continue to focus to fight for Canadians every day, while the Conservatives will invite a new slogan today, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. His ambition is to replace his boss. And he's not the only one. He's not alone. He wants to fire this Prime Minister who is not worth the cost after 8 years. Results speak for themselves. He doubled the cost of housing, increased the cost of groceries, and now he's doubled the national debt. The results are poverty and exorbitant prices for Canadians. Why another $40 billion? Why will another $40 billion change the results today? The Honourable Minister of Innovation, Mr. Speaker, the only ambition on this side of the House is to work every day for Canadians, and that is exactly what we've done for the past 8 years. While the Conservative leader is inventing a new slogan every week, Canadians know full well that slogans don't build homes. Slogans don't build growth, Mr. Speaker. Slogans don't create jobs. They've been there for 8 years, Mr. Speaker. When's the last time that the Conservatives created a single job in this country? On this side of the House, we're going to fight every day for Canadians. We're going to present a responsible budget, and we will continue to ensure growth for this country, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime after 8 years. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The results are in. He told us that if he massively increased debts and taxes, that someone else would pay for it. But of course, the Millionaire Trust Fund Prime Minister and his billionaire friends who invite him to private islands never pay a dime. It's always seniors, small businesses, and single mothers. Why would it be any different this time?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, in this budget, like all others, we will take into account the economic context as well as the needs of Canadians. That means for millennials and Gen Z as well, we will unlock supply in housing. We will ensure there are supports for renters. We will make sure there's a national school food program, and Mr. Speaker, and on this side of the House, we will make sure we do that while maintaining a strong fiscal position, AAA credit rating, and the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Slogans don't make good policy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, they've definitely proven that. Their slogan for the last 8 years is that you can double the debt and someone else will just pay the bill. But we know who pays every single time. It is welders and waitresses, seniors, small businesses, and single mothers who have faced doubling housing costs and unaffordable food. And now their solution is to do more of the same, to pour on billions of dollars more of inflationary spending that will drive up interest rates, inflations, and taxes. Why would we expect it to be any different this time?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, our government has lifted 2.3 million Canadians out of poverty, and I would like to put it to the opposition, if they truly believe in supporting Canadians, why have they voted against the Canada Dental Benefit? Why have they voted against Pharmacare? Why have they voted against $10 a day childcare, Mr. Speaker? That does not make sense because slogans do not make good policy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Except everything she just listed are slogans on which they have not delivered. What they have delivered is they've doubled the debt, which has caused the worst inflation in 40 years, interest rates rising faster than at any time in history, the doubling of housing costs, the worst growth in the G7, the worst housing price inflation in that same group of nations. And today, after all of these devastatingly costly results, what do? The same thing that got us in this problem in the first place. Why won't they realize that they're the problem and not the solution?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been masquerading across the country as a working-class hero, but it's fascinating when you actually listen to what he thinks people do for a living. In a couple of recent speeches, he said he thinks electricians capture electricity from the sky and that welders weld with their bare hands. What's he going to tell me next? The fishermen in my community dive beneath the ocean and catch them with their bare teeth? Mr. Speaker, I can forgive the opposition leader for being a career politician who's been on the public dime for a couple of decades, but if he wants to represent the interests of the working class, he should talk to a person who has a real job.
À l'ordre.
Order.
À l'ordre.
Order, please.
Getting a bit rowdy there.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Quebecers have been cheated by this government since 2019 when it comes to housing. We represent 22% of the population. We got only 14% of the money, and only 6% of that was for affordable housing. Despite all this, the Minister of Housing is giving lessons out today. He told the press, La Presse, that his government is acting in good faith, in his opinion, and that it's the provinces that have to agree to do things differently. It's the federal government that has to do things differently. It must stop fleecing Quebecers. Will it pay our fair share of housing funds immediately instead of giving out lessons? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. The Bloc Québécois is not defining policies on housing in Quebec. We have a good relationship with our counterparts in Quebec to build housing. For example, we are making investments to build 8,000 affordable housing units. The overall programs show that it's clear that we are ensuring that Quebec is getting its fair share. We will continue our work in building homes in Quebec and across the country. The Honourable Member for La Prairie, you have to do that, give lessons. It was this government that made the current housing crisis worse. It lost control of immigration and didn't pay Quebec its fair share for housing. That same government, incidentally, gave us ArriveCan. It can't print passports. It can't pay its own employees with Phoenix. You can't make this stuff up. These gifted people are telling the provinces to act in good faith and do things differently. Does the government understand that the only thing that needs to be done differently is for these gifted people to mind their own business and stop trying to manage Quebec's housing money? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, we are Quebecers, and when we're talking about housing, they're saying, mind your own business. Well, when we stand up and we talk about ensuring that our kids are not going to school hungry, they say no. But when the Prime Minister of a foreign country comes here from another continent and he tells us, well, we have to listen to them. Well, Mr. Speaker, they'd be good to listen to them because Quebecers are standing up for Quebecers and Canada, and we will always do this. The Honourable Member for Rosemount Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Canada's large corporations are highly profitable and among the least taxed in the world, a big gift from the Conservatives that the Liberals have maintained. In the U.S., President Biden has understood that it's unfair to workers, and he's going to make companies pay what they owe. Here, the Liberals are hesitating, treading water, beating around the bush, and we fear they won't have the courage to do the right thing. Mr. Speaker, I beg you, tell me, am I wrong?
Yeah, you're wrong.
The Honourable Minister of Innovation, Mr. Speaker, he is wrong. That's the simple answer, Mr. Speaker. There's some problems with memory, Mr. Speaker. We have an agreement with NDP colleagues. The Conservatives were opposed. We know that the best way to ensure stability.
See, the only way Liberals and NDP know how to solve any problem is to tax, 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 and that drives up the cost of everything. It has been proven that a lot of times, especially with business taxes, if you reduce the taxes, you increase the businesses and the business spending, and as a result, you increase your tax revenue. That has been a historical fact. That has happened. This is, they just don't know what they're doing.
This budget. Why? Because oil and gas lobbyists asked her to.
Yeah.
Just like the Conservatives, the Liberals keep caving to big oil and gas. Why do the Liberals keep protecting the profits of big oil and gas instead of everyday Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would point out Canada is the first and the only G20 country to have eliminated inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. We have introduced a tax on share buybacks across the economy to tackle exactly excess profits. Canada is putting into place the first and only in the world oil and gas emissions cap to hold the industry accountable for their own commitments. On the other hand, the Conservative leader has pledged to his oil and gas CEO donors to make pollution free again. We know who's in the pockets of oil and gas. It's that party over there.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
For 8 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, Canadians know that he's not worth the cost. Even proud Liberal and former bank Governor David Dodge, who worked for Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, says that this budget is on track to be the worst one since 1982. Wow. Canadians know that this budget will bring higher taxes, higher spending, meaning even more misery for families who can't afford to eat. Instead of drowning everyone, will they fix the budget, axe the tax on farmers and food, and stop the endless spending with the dollar-for-dollar law so that Canadians can afford to live?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the Honourable Member is aware, but our fiscal markers are very strong. That is a AAA credit rating by an independent, objective observer. That is the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, all the while we will continue to support vulnerable Canadians, something that they refuse to do on the other side of the House by voting against $10-a-day childcare, families and seniors every single time. Mr. Speaker, the hypocrisy is palpable.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Speaker, I'm not sure that the Honourable Member is aware of the pain that Canadians feel who can't afford to live in Canada. And what's worse is that they can't even afford to die. The Prime Minister's own news agency, the CBC, is reporting in provinces across Canada, dead bodies are being stored in mobile freezers because people can't afford the cost of laying their loved ones to rest. They can't afford their homes, they can't afford their groceries, they can't afford their gas, and now they can't afford a dignified goodbye. We're asking him just to stop. We know he won't. So how much inflationary fuel is the PM going to pour on the fire at 4 o'clock today?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, all Canadians deserve to die with dignity. They also deserve supports while they are alive, which is why we have reduced poverty by 22% on this side of the House, which is why we have supported families with $10-a-day childcare and the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted 500,000 children out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, what we will do on this side of the House is maintain a strong fiscal position while supporting Canadians, especially vulnerable Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We take that as our priority, unlike the other side of the House.
The Honourable Member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, we know that this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government are not worth the cost. His recent spending spree is inflationary and making everything worse, adding billions to the debt. This year alone, they will throw $52 billion towards debt servicing. That's more than they allocate to the provinces for health care. Doesn't the Prime Minister see his reckless spending is increasing inflation and debt, burdening all generations of already struggling Canadians? Or is he too busy cutting checks to care?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's delve into the numbers a little bit. When the leader of the Conservatives was Minister of Jobs, unemployment in Canada was 11% higher. Wages in this country were 75% of what they are now, and they had our foreign direct investment behind Ireland, behind Japan, and now, Mr. Speaker, we are third in the world, and when you divide it by our population, we're first in the world on bringing good jobs, on bringing investments, on making Canada a place where everybody wants to call home, unlike the Conservatives, which are full of bluff and bluster.
That guy's about to have a stroke.
The Honourable Member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Spendy ways, my friends, spendy ways. David Dodge said that this was likely to be the worst budget since 1982. 1982? Who was Prime Minister then? How out of control was that budget? How broke did Canada and Canadians become before Pierre Elliott Trudeau finally took his walk in the snow? Plus ça change, Mr.
The more things change.
2 million visits to food banks in a single month. Isn't it clear that Canadians are desperately hungry for change? How many more Canadians need to visit food banks before the Prime Minister really realizes that today's budget is a recipe for disaster?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today sounds like a day for some of the greatest hits, so let's put the Conservatives in the spotlight. Mr. Speaker, when we formed government in 2015, one of the first things we did is we asked the wealthiest 1% of Canadians to pay more. How did the Conservatives vote? Against. When we asked to make sure that Canadians and their children could have money coming to their houses every month, how did the Conservatives vote? Against. And now that we're going to have a national school food program and housing across this country and investments to grow this country, how are the Conservatives going to vote against?
I hope to have a defibrillation machine on that side of the aisle.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Certains.
I'm convinced that all members would like to hear the question by the Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, in order to bring inflation down and allow the Bank of Canada to lower interest rates, there aren't 36 solutions. You have to cap spending by applying the dollar for dollar rule. Want to spend $1? Save $1 somewhere else. It's simple. It's how everybody manages their budget at home. And that's how all government ministers should manage their departments. Is the Prime Minister going to cap spending to keep inflation and interest rates down in his budget that he's going to table shortly? The Honourable Minister of Public Services, Public Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives have always wanted to do and voted in favor is to reduce taxes for the wealthiest and make lives more difficult for everyone else, the middle class and those lower income earners. This includes a Canada Child Benefit. They voted against it in 2016. It was one of their first votes. It includes a vote against dental care for seniors, the 600,000 seniors who are now eligible for this plan. The leader of the Conservative Party flees when when he's asked questions about this. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party has 3 simple demands today. It's to build housing, not bureaucracy. The government insists on announcing inflationary measures that could cost Canadian taxpayers billions of dollars and only serves to increase inflation and the cost of living. Even David Dodge, the former Liberal governor of the Bank of Canada, has predicted that this will be the worst budget since 1982. Will the Prime Minister commit to following the demands of the Leader of the Official Opposition and build housing, not bureaucracy? The Honourable Minister of Public Procurement. My esteemed colleague is putting the Leader of the Opposition and housing together. He built 6 affordable housing units when he was Minister of Housing.
At least he's not counting on his fingers today.
So that's all he built during his mandate when he was the minister responsible for housing for the entire country. In my colleague's own writing, if I can say there's only 12 affordable housing units that were built. So that's more than twice what the Conservative leader built. The Honourable Member for Drummond, the English Montreal School Board has decided to challenge Bill 21 before the Supreme Court. That's fine, it's their right. But for the federal government to get directly involved in this case against the will of the National Assembly and provide money, our money, and lawyers, that's a no-no. The Quebec lieutenant says that Canada is secular, that the government supports secularism, but keeps telling us that we have to defend religious freedom against Bill 21. When will the Liberals understand that the best way to protect religion is for the state to have none at all? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, I would repeat a fact that my colleague knows full well, is that we're working with this. The Bloc Québécois, when they want to talk about Quebec issues, we are Quebecers and they tell us to mind our own business. A foreign leader came here and then someone tells them what to do, and that person must be listened to. I must tell my colleague, there are 35 Quebec MPs elected by Quebecers. We're proud Quebecers and will always stand up for Quebec. The Honourable Member for Drummond, Mr. Speaker, by supporting the will of the National Assembly, they can do good. By supporting the challenge to the law and the secular nature of the state, Ottawa is challenging our model of living together in Quebec. We don't want religion and the state to intermingle. We've moved on. I'm sure that this isn't easy for MPs who fight to ensure that the days of the House begin with a prayer, but Quebecers have chosen secularism. Religion is private, the state is public. I'd like the minister to answer frankly, why is his government opposed to secularism? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to be clear, it's a group of Quebecers who went to court to defend their rights under Quebec's Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They went to the Court of Appeal, and they've talked about it a few times for the past year. We'll be here to take part in the discussions. They're very important, and they are in relation to the Charter, the Canadian Charter and the Quebec Charter. The Honourable Member for Drummond, Mr. Speaker, this is a parliament where we hear God save the King for the head of the Anglican Church, in a parliament where elected representatives pray every day, not at home, which would be their strictest right. But here in this House, we have a government that wants to change the election date for Diwali, a religious holiday. And they're going to tell us that Canada supports secularism. That is so important. Honestly, will the minister admit that if he wants to challenge Bill 21, it's simply because he's against secularism?
They're not changing the election date for Diwali. That's just an excuse. They're changing it so that all these MPs who are not quite at 6 years service can get their pension. That's the truth of it.
These are questions that concern the Canadian Charter and the Quebec Charter, as we have indicated on a number of occasions. We have serious concerns with regard to the preventive use of the notwithstanding clause of Section 33 of the Charter. So we need to ensure this. Thank you.
Member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. But let's hear from some rural residents. Judy from Arkona writes, the carbon tax is killing us. And Scott from Tupperville says, as a senior, I'm finding it hard to cope. And Walter from Elvinston writes, I have not even received a carbon rebate. So in his broken promise budget being set to be delivered at 4 p.m. today, will the Prime Minister finally axe the tax on farmers, make food cheaper for Canadians, and pass Bill C-234 in its original form?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd really like to ask the Conservatives, they don't have to wait till 4 o'clock. They could pass the fall economic statement because, Mr. Speaker, that is having an impediment on what rural top-up is going. So in my riding, that would mean $1,430 to go every year to a family of 4. All across the country in Alberta, it would mean $2,160. I wish they'd pass the feds. Then they would truly be helping rural Canadians and rural families.
Here, here.
The honourable member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Well, Mr. Speaker, even the polls tell us that the majority of Canadians are fed up with this Prime Minister overspending, over-promising, under-delivering, and failing this country. Over $52 billion will be spent on servicing his debt alone. And while Canadians are struggling, he raised the price of gas, groceries, and home heating of carbon tax by 23% just 2 weeks ago. This is punishment, not progress. So in his big deficit budget later today, will the Prime Minister finally axe the tax on farmers and make food cheaper for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I want to tell this story again. I told it a few weeks ago. It was a constituent in my riding who took the time to track every single amount of money that he'd paid. And you know what? He doubled it, in case he missed a few things. He was in $38 every time he got his check. I wish they'd do their homework, Mr. Speaker, because 8 out of 10 Canadians do get more with their Canada carbon rebate, especially in rural Canada.
The honourable member from Regina Leuven.
This coming from the Liberal member who said if Canadians want programs, they should vote Liberal. Come on, Mr. Speaker. After 8 long years, this Liberal NDP government is not worth the cost. Canadians are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. And we all know that at 4 o'clock today, they're going to table a dumpster fire budget. This Prime Minister simply is not worth the cost. The question is, will he finally axe a tax on farmers so Canadians can put food on their tables?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we are focused on ensuring affordability for Canadians moving forward and addressing the climate issue. The price on pollution is an affordability mechanism. 8 out of 10 families get more money back. The PBO has underlined that. 300 economists across this country have underlined that. Mr. Speaker, every one of those MPs over there ran on the platform that included a price on pollution. This is the height of hypocrisy, and my goodness, their plan is only to take money away from poor people and to let the planet burn.
The honourable member from Regina Leuven.
Climate 10 can say whatever he wants, but they are 62nd out of 67 countries.
The honourable member is an experienced member in this House and understands that we cannot refer to other members other than their titles that they have. Order! Order. So the honourable member understands that, and I'd ask the honourable member to start from the top and to avoid such language.
He's not Ken. Ken's handsome.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. They see it time and time again when they go to the grocery store. And we know that our farmers are paying more. By 2030, when this carbon tax is fully implemented at $170 a ton, farmers will be paying $1 billion in taxes. So my question was again, on their 4 o'clock budget dumpster fire, will they axe the tax farmers so Canadians can put food on the table?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if the honourable member is actually trying to insult me or actually give me a compliment. But I would say that it's important in this chamber that we actually use facts, that we are not misleading Canadians. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. That is underlined by 300 economists in this country. And to be honest, it's underlined by the Premier of his province. When Scott Moe came here and actually testified, what he said is they looked at all alternatives and they were all too expensive. Well, that's absolutely the right thing, because we have put in place something that actually does address affordability, reduces carbon emissions. On that side of the House, they don't believe in climate change, and they act.
The honourable member from Hamilton Centre.
This past weekend, I met with over 100 youth from Hamilton who told me they don't even know how they're going to be able to pay rent, let alone ever be able to afford to buy a home in their lifetime. And a recent Spectator News report confirms that Hamilton's rent is out of control and quickly outpacing Canadian cities. And under the Liberals' watch, life has only gotten better for wealthy developers, and they're raking it in.
Yeah, under the Liberals, which is supported by the NDP, which is the party that you are a member of.
Today, I'm going to ask all honourable members, in particular the member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, please to only take the microphone when he's take the floor when he's recognized by the Speaker. I'm going to ask the honourable, give the honourable member 20 seconds to finish his question. The honourable member.
Under the Liberals' watch, life has only gotten better for big money developers, and they're raking it in while the rents double for Canadians. So why are the Liberals refusing to take on corporate developers and failing to build non-market affordable housing now?
Order. The honourable member, the honourable minister, rather, for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I have great respect for the honourable member and thank him for his advocacy to build more homes in Hamilton, but he may not be aware that we recently invested $93.5 million in his city to help speed up the construction of up to 9,000 new homes. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we are putting money on the table that's going to help speed up the development. But if his concern is about building non-market housing, I'm pleased to point to the $1 billion we invested in the fall economic statement to build more affordable housing, the hundreds of millions we're using to build more cooperative housing, the $4 billion we're using to deal with the needs of urban, rural, and northern communities to serve Indigenous peoples. We're going to build housing for the most vulnerable. We're going to build housing for everyone.
The honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous people in Winnipeg make up nearly 75% of the unhoused population. Almost 90% are sleeping outdoors or living in encampments. The Liberals' inadequate response is costing lives. And the Conservative leader, he cut 8,000 affordable units when he was the minister in charge. Clearly not a Conservative priority. In today's budget, will the Liberals commit to increasing funding for affordable housing with rent geared to income and get serious about ending homelessness?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her concern, and she's right to point out the desperate need of so many communities across the country when it comes to building more affordable housing. She's right to point out the need for increased investment to support the needs of Indigenous people who remain unhoused. That's why we put more than $4 billion on the table to support the needs of Indigenous peoples in community, and an additional $4.3 billion to deal with the needs of Indigenous peoples who live in urban, rural, and northern environments. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we've invested more than $120 million to build thousands of homes in her city. We're going to keep doing what we need to build more affordable housing. And one point of correction, it was 800,000 units that the opposition leader lost while he was housing minister.
The honourable member from Fleetwood, Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, today the Deputy Prime Minister will deliver the budget. Over the last few weeks, we've seen the important efforts of this government to invest in this country, building a record we could be proud of. On the other side, Leader of the Opposition loves to talk about his record when he was Minister of Employment. He wants to convince Canadians that he has the solution to make life better. Cut, cut, cut. Well, cuts don't create jobs, cuts don't create investment, cuts don't increase wages. Can the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages tell the House what this government is going to do to make life better for Canadians?
Great question.
The honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Fleetwood, Port Kells, for his hard work. Since we took office in 2015, Mr. Speaker, wages are up, employment is up, and foreign direct investment is up. We are investing in Canadians, in the economy, creating great jobs and growth for the whole country. When the Leader of the Opposition was Minister of Employment, wages were lower, employment was lower, foreign investment was lower. While we're fighting for fairness for every generation, his record is clear, and there's one thing that'll be up if he ever takes over: cuts, cuts, and more cuts.
The honourable member from King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, it's clear this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. In Newfoundland and Labrador, there are 28 bodies in a freezer outside of a hospital because their families can't afford to bury them. This sounds like a Netflix horror movie, but sadly, it is the nightmare of this Prime Minister's out-of-control spending. Conservatives demand him to stop the outrageous spending and make life affordable. Will they listen and give Canadians the ability to bury their loved ones?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we know it's a challenging time for many, many people. That's why we've been there all along, Mr. Speaker. We've been there with the child care benefit. We've been there with the increased OIS and GIS. We're now there with a dental program that's rolling out to help people. We know we have our carbon rebate this year for people. We know it's challenging times. We'll be there for Canadians, and we always will be, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from King Vaughan.
The old song is, "Stop in the name of Canadians." 28 bodies in a freezer because families can't afford to bury their loved ones. Houses have doubled. Food bank usage is higher in history. Well, you know. Families are losing their homes. Enough. Today, the Liberals are announcing their budget. Will they show some compassion and ensure there's $1 of savings for every dollar of spending so Canadians can afford to live?
Before the Honourable Minister gets up, I'm going to encourage members, please. I hear some singing in the House. You know that singing is not permitted in the House. I'll just ask them to please, whoever is doing that, to please stop. The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, when people find it very challenging and very upsetting time in their life, they know that this party on this side of the House is there to help them for in many reasons. And Mr. Speaker, we don't believe in slogans. We believe in helping people, which we have been since the very beginning, and we will continue to, especially with today's budget later today. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Liberal government is just not worth the cost. We've had 8 years of skyrocketing deficits and debt, and this government has never controlled its spending. It's the perfect storm that generates inflation. And what's the result of that? Rent has doubled. Mortgages have doubled. It's now cheaper for people to live in motels than in an apartment. At a bare minimum, during the budget later, will this government present a plan to control spending?
Not likely.
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. 6, Mr. Speaker. 6 is the number of affordable housing units that the leader of the Conservative Party had built when he was Minister of Housing for the entire country during his entire term. Quebec municipalities are building 8,000 housing units with the help of the federal government. If you divide that by 6, it's about 1,200 times more. And yet, the leader of the Conservative Party is insulting Quebec municipalities. He's calling them incompetent. Who's really incompetent here? The Conservative leader with his 6 housing units, or Quebec municipalities with 8,000? The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, this member from Quebec seems to have fun with numbers these days. Well, I have a number for him, 750. Arrive can cost $750 times more. And who was president of the Treasury Board at that time? The member across the way. And then after that, he was Minister of Health. And now he's Minister of Procurement. So it's a real hat trick of incompetence. Does he think it's insulting to have spent 750 times more when it was his responsibility to ensure that things were done right? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Insulting is indeed the key word here. Insulting Quebec municipalities by calling them incompetent. They are building 8,000 affordable housing units.
Keeps talking about how many housing units the government has built. But it's the government's job to get out of the way of private development of housing units, not to build them themselves. That's the reason why we're in this financial crisis, is the government wants to take on the responsibility of doing everything. It's not their job. Cut costs, get out of the way of people so they can do it themselves.
Border fiasco. On May 13th, importers may hit a wall at the border at customs. Why? Because there will be a new application at the border called CARM for paying import duties. Last week, 19 organizations raised concerns that neither the CBSA nor businesses will be ready on time. Will Ottawa delay the implementation of this application until the Committee on International Trade finishes its study of the matter and comes up with recommendations? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, as my colleague knows very well, we always work with committees. We always collaborate with them, and I myself have met with the leader of the CBSA. We met yesterday on this matter. I have full confidence in the agency, which is fully aware of the circumstances surrounding this application, and I have full confidence that it will be handled correctly. The Honourable Member. Well, it's all very well to talk about full trust, but there's a precedent here for Ottawa's failures on big IT systems. We all know Phoenix. 8 years later, the federal government still can't pay its employees property. And there's another precedent with CBSA, ArriveCan. Wow, how reassuring. So coming back to this CARM system, the agency did not provide the documents requested by the committee, so the committee cannot finish up its study. And no one seems to know what to do if the application crashes on May 13th. Will Ottawa do what it has to do, which is delay the start date?
L'honorable ministre de la Sécurité publique.
The Honourable Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we have consulted and we will continue to consult exporters, importers. We understand their concerns. That is why I raised the question with the head of the CBSA, and I do not share the pessimism of my colleague from the Bloc. As my colleague, the Quebec Lieutenant, often says, they are experts on pessimism in the Bloc. I don't share that, and I think we will act correctly on this file.
Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, it's clear he isn't worth the cost or the corruption, like his $60 million Arrive scam contractor, who's being hauled before the House of Commons tomorrow for refusing to answer committee questions about his role in this Prime Minister's latest multi-million-dollar scandal. Now, this contractor claims that he only did Google searches and sent LinkedIn direct messages. So what did this guy and his partner give to these Liberals in exchange for the multi-million dollars that they were paid?
The Honourable Minister for Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, just because my honourable friend continues to repeat something that he knows is not accurate doesn't make it so. He knows very well, Mr. Speaker, that there are a series of investigations that are being undertaken. The RCMP are seized with this matter. If the House, in its wisdom, decides to call people before the bar, that's entirely within the purview of the House. And Mr. Speaker, we've also said from the beginning that anybody who abused taxpayers' money should face the consequences, and that's exactly what will happen.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The minister gets up and says that something's not true. Well, point to the lie is what I would say to him, because we know that 75% of the contractors listed on this app did no actual work. We know that two guys working out of a basement were paid tens of millions of dollars but did no actual work. And we know that every step of the way, these Liberals have tried to cover it up, like that minister and everyone on the front bench and the right to the back voted against having the Auditor General investigate. The question is very simple. These yo-yos working out of a basement were paid tens of millions of dollars, did no actual work. What did they give these Liberals in exchange for that sweetheart deal?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Again, Mr. Speaker, if our honourable friend wants me to point out the part of his question which he knows isn't accurate, it's the last sentence of the question.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. While speaking of this scandal, the ArriveCan scandal has reached unheard of levels in 100 years of Canadian history. Tomorrow, Christian Firth will appear at the bar of the House of Commons right here for protecting his friends within the Liberal government by refusing to give their names and lying. Just think about it. 2 guys working out of a basement with no specialized IT knowledge. They got $20 million for developing a digital application. ArriveCAN. I would ask the minister responsible for these historic levels of corruption, I would ask him to get up and apologize for this scandal, which made his Liberal friends rich on the backs of Canadians. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows very well that there is an investigation underway. The House is bringing in someone to appear on this matter. That is completely appropriate within the responsibilities of the House of Commons. We accept that. And from the beginning, whether with the Auditor General, whether with the RCMP, whether with parliamentary committees, we have always accepted an in-depth review of this situation. And anyone who has taken advantage of taxpayer funds will pay the appropriate consequence. The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, National Tourism Week celebrates a vital industry in Canada. It represents 1 out of 10 jobs and affects all regions. Like mine, Châteauguay-Lacolle, which will soon be called Châteauguay-les-Jardins and Napierville. Our government is making strategic investments, like the Indigenous Tourism Fund and the Tourism Growth Program. It's exactly the opposite of what the Conservatives would do. They always vote to cut these programs. Can the Minister of Tourism tell us about the importance of the tourism industry? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It just irks me to no end that Liberals get up and ask questions of other Liberals. This is supposed to be a session where opposition parties question the government, not a session where they can grandstand by having Liberals ask Liberals questions to grandstand. Just irks me to no end. It's a waste of time in question period as far as I'm concerned.
Madame Carnaval. That's why on this side of the House, we will all be wishing Canadians happy Tourism Week.
It's rare that I hear the Honourable Member's voice carry so far. I'm going to ask him to make sure that he doesn't speak until he's recognized by the chair. The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Just when you think this NDP Liberal government couldn't be more out of touch, they go ahead and nominate the CBSA as unsung heroes for the Arrive scam, recklessly spending $60 million taxpayer dollars and demonstrating some of the worst financial record-keeping we've ever seen is the opposite of innovative and effective procurement practices. The CBSA should be an example of how not to do government procurement. Why on earth would this government reward incompetence?
Wow. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows very well that we have instituted a series of changes in terms of the procurement process, both at CBSA and horizontally across the Government of Canada. My colleague, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, has spoken about the changes we've made in light of the recommendations, of course, of the Auditor General. We welcome other reviews, whether it's parliamentary committees. And in the case of ArriveCAN, Mr. Speaker, as you know, the RCMP are looking into this matter, and as I said, anybody who abused taxpayers' money will properly face the consequences.
Absolutely.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, the costly NDP Liberal coalition have announced another poorly conceived federal idea. Their dental care debacle is failing Canadians. I have one simple question. How many dentists in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI have signed up for the dental care debacle?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, it's great news, Mr. Speaker, because unlike the member opposite, we're working with dental providers and we're opening up a new portal, which means that in order to participate, all they have to do is accept that dental card and provide service. And the dentists that I'm talking to, as we work through these issues of the negotiation, are extremely excited to do what the member is not, which is to make sure that every Canadian from coast to coast to coast gets oral health care. And that means 1.8 million seniors and soon 9 million Canadians who will have the oral health care that they need.
Not an answer to the question.
I ask the honourable member from Oxford, please, to allow his colleague to ask a question and allow the minister to answer. The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
Well, interesting enough, the Minister of Health of the NDP Liberal government has been singing the praises and photo ops of this program for months now. Their plan is lacking and it's failing Canadians. One simple question once again to the minister. How many dentists in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI have signed up for the botched care announcement? I'll actually give him the answer. It's 8 out of 1,107.
Wow.
8 out of 1,100.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows that we're opening a new portal and that members don't have to sign up, that all that needs to happen is they bring their card and they participate in the program. But here's the truth, Mr. Speaker.
I'll ask honourable members to please restrain themselves. I know it's budget day, it's a big day. The Honourable Minister has 20 seconds left on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is that they don't want about 9 million Canadians who don't have dental care to get service. They don't want or believe that Canadians who don't have access to diabetes medication to get it. They don't want, Mr. Speaker, for women to be able to get access to universal contraception. So they push despair because they don't want people to hope for something better. Well, we're there to deliver something better.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, climate change is real. The science is clear. Current drought conditions and above-average temperatures are bringing an increasing risk of wildfires. Last year, more than 230,000 Canadians were forced out of their homes, not knowing what the future looks. Now, next to
75 to 85% of those wildfires were human-caused and intentional at that. So, yeah, let's put things in perspective here.
Been doing to
Informally, I did ask the Honourable Member from Michilimackinac Fraser Valley, please, to allow the member from Richmond Hill to ask his question. I'm going to give the Honourable Member from Richmond Hill 15 seconds to finish his question. The Honourable Member.
Last year, more than 230,000 Canadians were forced out of their home not knowing what the future holds. Now, next to 100 fires are already burning in British Columbia, and communities are rightfully concerned. Can the Minister of Emergency Preparedness tell us what our government has been doing to make sure we will be there for British Columbians this summer?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Richmond Centre for this very important and timely question. Last year we had the worst wildfire season in Canadian history because of climate change, and
you know, we could put an end to all these wildfires if we just put every irregular border crosser into service as a firefighter for, I don't know, as many years as it takes to process their claim. And if they didn't want to go into service as a firefighter, well, then they can return to wherever they came from. That would actually solve all of these problems. A lot of these fires are actually burning underground.
Potentially this season could be even worse. We have been working very closely with the province and territories and Indigenous leaders to provide the resources that they need. We are training more firefighters, providing additional firefighting equipment, and adding more initiatives to provide humanitarian support. On this side of the House, we know the devastating impact that climate change is having on Canadians, and we will be there for them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Seniors are being kicked out of their homes because assisted living is now fodder for greedy developers and private equity firms. 90-year-olds are being put on the streets so that super rich CEOs can make a buck. Yep. The Liberals and the Conservatives let developers buy up affordable housing, and now they're letting them go after long-term care. A family whose father was kicked out of his home called this a death sentence. Will the government stop this in its tracks and use the budget to end greedy CEOs from evicting vulnerable seniors?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, as we move down a path of increasing investments to build more affordable housing, we have to acknowledge the very real challenge that exists when affordable housing that is already in communities is snapped up to be for the purpose of renovating those who live in it. That's why we're moving forward with a Canadian First, a new acquisition fund that's going to help nonprofits buy up existing low-cost rentals so they can keep them affordable in perpetuity. This is a new direction that's going to help many thousands of Canadians not just find a place to call home, but to keep a place to call home that they can actually afford.
Honourable member from North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, in the past 2 years, there's been a 50% increase in denied claims for veterans seeking disability benefits. This is shameful. They served our country, risking their lives and safety in the process, yet the Liberals keep turning their backs on them, just like the Conservatives did for years before. This is an issue of respect and livelihood. Many veterans are struggling and they rely on these benefits to make ends meet. Do the Liberals plan on fixing this, or will they keep denying veterans their dignity?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Veterans
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleague for important work on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Mr. Speaker, our government has always been there for veterans and will continue to be there. Since 2015, we've invested more than $11 billion in additional funding to support veterans and their families. We've also, in contrast to the Conservative Party of Canada, when they closed the Veterans Affairs office on this side of the House, we opened them immediately because we recognize that they provided direct services to victims, to veterans. Mr. Speaker, we will always be there to help support our veterans in their time of need and their family. Thank you.
No, they're not.
And as such, it comes to an end of question period. But I would like to bring to the attention of honourable members, it's a great privilege for me to draw to the attention of honourable members in the presence of the gallery of Cindy Woodhouse Nepanak, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations.
Okay, so the question period has come to an end, obviously. In about 45 minutes, I'll start, well, a little sooner than 45 minutes, I'll start another live stream on the budget, and then you'll see all of the leaders of the House and the Finance Minister actually in the House. They were not present, likely because they were being briefed. I believe it is tradition that the House leaders of the opposition parties are essentially locked in a room and get a preview of the budget just prior to the budget being released. I'm not sure how long that presentation will be, but I will bring it to you live, and I will try and get my chat working. So if you are listening, if you're viewing, you can view on the you can participate on the chat as well. So we will see you in about a little more than 40 minutes time.